Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Utica City Church. Good morning, everybody online. I appreciate your being here, and we're going to hear a word from the Lord today. And I shared a little bit with the congregation earlier that this is one of the hardest messages that I've ever had to prepare, and because it's on racism. The sermon is on the topic today. The title for the sermon is racism. I wrote down a biblical perspective, but actually it's more like the biblical perspective. Now, that doesn't mean it's the final word in what the Bible says, because I only have an hour, right? I don't have 8 hours to fully go over history and, in the United States and Christianity in the United States. And what made it so hard, and we're going to talk about this a lot, is nowhere in the Bible does God say, when we go back in the history of the United States, and when we go back in the history of the Bible, the root of racism manifest is slavery, isn't it? So I can't, and in the United States, that's really what it goes back to in the birth of the nation, is that the nation chose to embrace slavery as a means of profit, right? Cheap labor, and took a people who they had no right to take and put them in oppression, didn't they? In bondage, right? And that the racist results of that, and here's where there's so much gray area and people have different opinions, but I'm going to give you my opinion, has largely been eradicated, but has not also. To deny that there's still racism in the United States today would be just sheer ignorance. To deny that, to state that, I'm just going to speak in today's terms because this is what's going on. To state that white folk are inherently racist by the color of their skin is not right. All right? And to extrapolate that, to expand on that, to say that with a biblical view is even worse, even more incorrect. All right? So, because it's really one of the most serious issues going on in our nation right now, it's very current, and it's a very sensitive topic. Should the pulpit shy away from talking to you about these things? Absolutely not. But I will say this, many pulpits do shy away from really talking about these things because they don't want to offend people. They don't want to lose people. It's hard enough now getting people inside the church with the COVID and the pandemic, and everyone's being programmed, being brainwashed to fear. So a lot of churches that have high overheads, have expenses, they don't want to offend anybody right now, And look, I don't want to offend anybody either. But I'm also going to teach you the truth and preach to you the truth because you need to know. And why wouldn't I preach on the most relevant topics that are going on in our nation right now, in our world right now? Amen? So I just thought it was time this week to speak about racism and give you a biblical perspective. And like I said before, I apologize in advance if my language is offensive to anybody. I have to pick terms that I believe are commonly used today amongst everybody, right? So I'm going to use terms white, black, brown, and yellow. Because the first thing you have to realize is that historically speaking, racism is not a black issue. Racism is multinational throughout the ages. If you go back to the beginning of the Bible, the beginning of slavery was not a black on white or black on Middle Eastern thing. It was a conqueror-conquered thing. So you could be Turkish, and if you're conquered, you're carried off into slavery. Two great examples of that would be Israel. Three times throughout Israel's history, they were taken away into slavery. And, anyone who knows Jewish people today, they're Caucasian. They're of Middle Eastern descent, but by and large, they're fair-skinned. Yet 3 times the nation was carried off into slavery. Once into Egypt, once into Assyria, which is, you could say, Syria, and once into Babylon, which would be Iraq and Iran. okay? So that's the first thing you need to realize. The second thing you need to realize is that there is a biblical terminology that sees slavery in the positive. Pin drop. You know, Paul, when you read the Bible, you will see in most of Paul's letters, he will say, I, Paul, a bondservant of Jesus Christ. That's a slave. That's the word. The word in the Greek is doulos. Whenever in the New Testament you see Jesus talk about servants, he's actually saying the word slave in the Greek. It's just that, you see, to use the word slave has so many negative connotations, doesn't it? Because of the oppression. And it's a valid argument, it's a valid disagreement to have for the use of the word slave in a Christian sense. You see, when he uses the word servant for slave, he's really delineating what it means to be Jesus Christ. I am a slave of Christ, but not in the sense of what happened here in the United States at the beginning of this nation. Not in that sense. You see, throughout history, there's been two forms of slavery. There's been the slavery by oppression, and there's been the slavery, it's called bondservant. It's called, it's like if you have a debt. There was two ways you could become a bondservant. Either you had a debt, so you went into a voluntary slavery to this person, and it wasn't abusive. It was you working a debt off. And then once the debt was paid or Jubilee came and the person decided to free you, you were freed, released from the debt. It was voluntary. It wasn't an abusive connotation. The other one is if the person goes to let you go, and you have fallen so deeply in love with that person that you say, you know what, I want to become your bondservant for life. And then it's depicted in the Bible. He would take an awl, which is what's used to punch holes in leather, and he would put the person's ear up against the doorpost, and they would punch a hole in the ear. And that would delineate, I would show to everyone around that you are now the bondservant of that master. Jesus Christ is called the what? The master. We are his bondservants. I voluntarily have put down my desires and my will and my ways and my thoughts and my behaviors to serve, to actually serve, or to live by, to put myself under his teaching, under his ways of morality, his ways of being, for my love for him. What's his promise to me in return? And here's where it gets separated because of the fall of man. Here's where slavery historically went off the rails. He promises to love us as his bride in our servitude towards him. And that elevates that beyond the word slave. That's why you never see the word. You see the word a bit, but not all the time. And not when Jesus says it. It's always interpreted as servant. Okay? All right. So let's get into this a little bit. So we have to begin at the beginning, right? And I can't make this an 8-hour sermon, so it's not going to be perfect. First thing you have to know. Second thing is I need to pray. Amen? Because I can't do this alone. Father God, I come before you, Lord, and I ask you, Father, to speak through me. Holy Spirit, I submit myself to you as I did when I was preparing this, Lord. And I ask that you would give a perfect word, Lord, of your will and your heart towards this congregation. There's so much, racism, Lord, right now is being used to, it's been hijacked for political purposes, Lord God. It's no longer about morality, it's about gaining power for a group, Lord God, in government. By turning the masses against themselves, instead of looking for solutions, it's looking at problems and causing divide rather than seeking solutions, Lord. So I come before you, Lord, now to present the solution, Lord God, which is you, Jesus. Realize, church, that's the only solution. We live in a fallen world. Do you think that you're any better than the people 100, 200, 300 years ago? Even in your agreeing that racism must end, if all the power was given to you to solve the problem, you'd create a racist solution. It would just be racist towards the other group. It's the plight of mankind. It's why slavery was perverted into a Bible, into the picture of something, into something that Satan tainted because of the fall through mankind. Amen? So I have 4 points here. The first one, Lord, thy will be done in the name of Jesus. Holy Spirit, you have control in the name of Jesus. Amen. First point, Israel was not the first nation recorded to implement slavery. Now, I'm using this book, all right? I did a lot of research, and I came up with a couple of things, and I came up with a main problem, which I'm going to discuss with you here. Egypt was actually the first nation mentioned as a nation which enslaved people, and that was in Genesis, when they enslaved Israel, okay? So it was a Middle Eastern nation, no mention of Africa, no mention of this stuff. It's a Middle Eastern nation enslaving a Middle Eastern nation, okay? Joseph was a well-known slave. I don't know if you know about Joseph. He was the son of Jacob, the son of the 12 tribes. Jacob was the patriarch. He had 12 sons, and they became the 12 tribes of Israel. Joseph was one of those tribes, and he was the youngest, and he had favor with the Lord and with Jacob, and his brothers all got jealous, and they beat him, and they threw him in a pit to die. And he didn't die, and then these slave traders from Midian came along, and they sold him to the Midianite traders, and then the Midianite traders sold him in Egypt, and he became the slave of Potiphar, who was like the head chief of security for Pharaoh. Okay? And he talks about his time in slavery and bondage and oppression because he ends up in jail because he's falsely accused of rape by Potiphar's wife who wanted to have sex with him. And he refused and he ran. And when he ran, she pulled on him, she grabbed him and his coat came off. And she got mad at him for running away and she concocted the story to her husband that he tried to rape her. Look, here's his coat. I grabbed it as he tried to run away when he was getting caught. He ended up in jail for like 15 years, 20 years. And then he gets restored into power by God. And he ends up becoming the prime minister of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. This guy rises, talk about the favor of the Lord. And when his brothers come, because there's a famine and they need help, and they come to Egypt to beg for food, and he says, what you meant harm for me, God meant for good. And isn't that exactly what Romans 8:28 tells us? That God will use all things for the good of those who are called according to his purposes. Now, you're going to have to lower your own prejudices here and your own preconceived beliefs here, and I'm going to talk objectively about the Bible. And this is one of those defining moments for you are you going to say the Bible's right, or are you going to say, I am not going to follow the Bible? It's your choice. That's the first point. Second point, Israel as a nation was enslaved no less than 3 times, 2 times in what is called the exiles or the dispersions. That was to Assyria and to Babylon, in addition to its previous enslavement to Egypt. Now, it was such that, here's a biblical picture of slavery before it was perverted by man. When Israel came to Egypt for this food, because everywhere around was famine, and Joseph, because he was friends with Pharaoh, and they invited Israel to come live with them. And Israel was given a place called, I forget the name. What was the name of their city, Nancy? What? Goshen. Thank you. And, one thing I hate is getting old. I'm telling you, I forget dopey things, I'm thinking Gibeon, Anyway, and then when Pharaoh dies, a new Pharaoh is made, and he hates the Jews. And that's the beginning of slavery for Israel. They didn't start off being slaves in the sense that we think of slavery and racism, although I'm sure the racism had already begun in Israel because here was this nation that was not Egyptian getting favor among Pharaoh, given a whole good piece of land for their own. I mean, talk about godly attributes of an ungodly nation, right? Egypt. But then the true colors come through and they get enslaved. Third point, other nations were involved in slavery. Kingdoms worldwide and every continent practiced slavery. Thus, lands have seen slaves of every color. These are the original slaves, and we must remember this as as we take a view today towards slavery in the United States of people primarily of African American descent. I'm saying that, but I want you to understand that there were slaves of other nations in America. One of the biggest ones, other than the African American people, were Chinese. Chinese people were used as slaves here in the United States. Not so much in the plantations, but a good portion of our rail system across the United States were built by Chinese slaves. But primarily, it was people of an African American descent. And when we talk about slavery and racism in the United States today, obviously that's the picture we get. Right? Rightfully so. And because it is rightfully so, it deserves the attention that it's getting. All right? We can't minimize the harm that was done to a people because of their skin color and because maybe they weren't as technologically advanced, so they were easily conquered. Right? None of this is Christian. You need to know this. That even though the Bible, and here's where I run into the biggest issue that required the most prayer and careful making of notes to portray this so that I don't come across the wrong way. God doesn't say slavery is wrong. Nowhere in the Bible does God say, thou shalt not have slavery. So that's hard. So now I have to present this because I know God's not a racist, right? So I got to think to myself, well, if God could make rules for having slaves, because that's what he does in the Old Testament, and that's what he does in the New Testament. And what you see is a progression of how people are treated and the status of slaves in the Old and New Testament. And what you're seeing is what I call a progressive revelation. You see, in the Old Testament, we don't have Christ, do we? In the Old Testament, it's all shadows and types and pictures of Christ, but no Christ. Although really, Christ does appear several times in the Old Testament. But he doesn't reveal himself as the Christ, and he doesn't come as the Christ. Here's your clue. Father God is spirit. Every time God manifests in the Old Testament, it's Jesus. Father God is a spirit. He has no body. Jesus, God, has a body. So whenever Father God materializes here on earth, he's materializing as himself, Jesus, before his incarnation as Messiah on earth in 0 AD. So that was a progressive revelation, and he's teaching Israel. You know, the Bible tells us in Galatians 3:23 that the law was our schoolmaster to lead us to Christ. The law was our guardian until the time of Christ. In other words, the law did something. The Old Testament rules did something while man evolved spiritually to the point where they were ready to receive Messiah. And I believe the same thing happened with slavery. I think that ever since its beginning, there was never a time that slavery was purely a good thing and something that was always, God always portrayed the rules for it as such. And there were always rules about how you don't abuse slaves. Really. Right? But since the beginning, because man was fallen, Satan has dominion over this earth, slavery was always a perverted, oppressive thing. Whether it was to a Jew, whether it was to a Turkish person, whether it was to an Iranian, or whether it was towards an African American, or African. They were African before they were African American, weren't they? Right? Kingdoms in every worldwide in every continent practice slaveries. Thus, lands have seen slaves of every color. Fourth point, remember, even though the above might be most visible, African American slavery, slavery of the black man, the black woman in this nation, and that's what's really at the forefront of our culture right now, is dealing with that. Racism and even slavery worldwide still occurs today. Racism and slavery worldwide still occurs today. At least we can say in the United States, slavery doesn't occur anymore, right? Wrong. Slavery still happens today. It's just not the black man or the black woman. Now, you know what it is? Sorry? Exactly. Child trafficking, sex trade. That is our primary form of modern-day slavery here in the United States. But it's not a culturally acceptable thing. It's something that's happening under the radar, with, in many cases, the involvement of those in power. And isn't that racism? Against the woman, right? Regardless of color. Slide 2, please. Numbers 12, verse 1 says this. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. Now, because we're dealing today with major protests by Black Lives Matter, the movement, the organization, I will use for my verse the only instance, to be found in the Bible regarding what could have been viewed as racism against an African, a woman of dark skin. Not to say there aren't examples, but it's the earliest example I could find, a direct example of racism being really spelled out. Even though the context of this verse is not racist when you get into the fuller explanation. And just so you know it from the start, they weren't mad at Aaron so much, at Moses so much because she was an Ethiopian woman. That's what Cushite means. When you read further on, they were mad because they felt that she had gotten undue favor in appointing who the judges would be over Israel. All right? But that's not what my sermon is about. So I'm not going to talk about that. What caught my eye about this verse is that it points out that she was Ethiopian. And why would it bother to point out that she was Ethiopian if there wasn't racist undertones? Why point it out? She's just a woman. Well, no, she's a woman of dark skin, and she did not come from Egypt or Israel. So that might not have been the main context, but it's still there, isn't it? And it still shows that there's a fallen mankind looking at things through a skewed lens of color in this particular case. All right? So the Cushite wife. Well, first off, the words for slaves are used almost from the beginning of the Bible, showing us that slaves were in bondage almost from the beginning after the fall, finding actual instances regarding named people involved in racism narratives were nowhere to be found. You cannot find a direct case of a racist act committed against anybody in the Bible. I looked. I was like, I thought this would be easy. And so I had to dig, and you see, but isn't that the case today? Here. You know, it's easy to say that regardless of what, what's his name? George, the guy who got killed by the Minneapolis cops. Floyd. Regardless of what George Floyd was doing, legal, illegal, that started this encounter, one thing we know for sure is that he was abused and he was killed, and largely because of his color and because of who he was and how he looked. All right, and that's an obvious case. And whenever that happens to a black man, a black woman, I don't care what color you are, if you're Chinese or Muslim, you know, those are obvious things. But really, there's also an undertone of racism that isn't so obvious. When the white man and the black man, or the white woman and the black woman, or the white woman and the Spanish woman come for a job interview, and they're both equally qualified, and the African American or Spanish woman does not get the job. That's racism. All right, to some degree. All right, and well, it may or may not be racism. It's really an individual thing. It's like we have to be honest with ourselves as a people to say, am I being racist right now? You know, and check ourselves to see. So the Cushite wife, she's widely believed to be of Ethiopian origin. She is not the main subject of the text. It was the power struggle over who would judge Israel and who was being picked. All right? But even by today's standards, just the way this is framed speaks of racism. All right? Now, Jewish tradition, this isn't scripture. This is from all the Jewish commentators through time who commentated on the Old Testament scriptures, the rabbis. All right? This is what they had to say. It holds that this woman was Moses' first wife, and she was a slave in Egypt. And the reason why she was a slave in Egypt was because Egypt conquered Ethiopia, and she was the daughter of the king of Ethiopia. So as part of the spoils, Pharaoh took the king of Ethiopia's daughter and brought her into servitude in Egypt, and she served in the king's court. Black woman, now in Egypt, serving as a slave, but not an abused slave in the sense that you would think, but she's still a slave. And she's still not seen as equal in any sense of the word. Moses, a Jew, has been adopted by Pharaoh as his grandson. So he's a prince of Egypt. Met her there and made her his wife. That's tradition. So, tradition holds that when Moses delivered Israel out of Egypt, he took this woman with him. Because if she had remained in Egypt, she would have been killed because of what Moses did, what God did through Moses in Israel. So he had to take her with him. There's speculation of whether they were still together as a married couple, whether he was still sleeping with her. None of that matters for our conversation here today. Okay? We also have recorded in Genesis 16 the story about Hagar. Hagar was Sarah's maid. She was a concubine, not of Israel. And she ended up giving her to Abraham to sleep with because she could not get pregnant, Sarah. And then he sleeps with Hagar, and she gives birth to Ishmael. And immediately, Sarah, who set this whole thing up, is now really oppressive against Hagar, and ultimately has Abraham just send them away into the desert. Because of who they are. They weren't treated as equals, regardless of the reasons why. This is fallen mankind. Sarah, the mother of Israel, was racist to that degree. Right? And, right or wrong or the reasons why really don't matter if you're just going to take an honest look and say, look, she didn't do good there, yet God still used it for the good of all involved. And when that happened, he came to Hagar and said, I will protect you and I will make for you a nation as well. Her and Ishmael. Okay? But the larger point here, why is the Bible silent regarding the condemnation of slavery and the implied racism of slavery? Why in both the Old and New Testaments do the Scriptures accommodate slavery? Let's just call it what it is. They accommodate slavery. Paul gives advice to Timothy on how the master should treat the slave and how the slave attitude should be towards the master. And here's the thing you have to realize. For most of history, slavery's been an accepted thing amongst the fallen mankind. Always has been. And, so now I have to take that, and I have to say, well, God isn't saying no, and he's giving advices on how we're to treat slaves. How does this all mesh? How does this all mesh without me going, God's a racist, and throwing this away? Fallen mankind. Man had to evolve. Just as in the Old Testament, Jesus couldn't come in Genesis 3. He had to wait till 400 years after the last book of the Old Testament before he came. And that from then till now, God has been using slavery as a picture of what it means to be a Christian. These are all in the positive senses. Because God would never abuse you. You have to understand that first and foremost, if you're going to submit yourself to Jesus. We always say it here, submit yourself to Christ, surrender to Christ. There's a reason he's called Master. Right? And we have to, and especially African American people, have to get over what's the word? Stigma. The negative connotations of what that means, of seeing it through in a lens of abuse. Rightfully so. And to rise above that and say, no, there's a good way of being this. And that good way of being this applies to the white person, the black person, the yellow person, the brown person. I don't care if you're Spanish, Chinese, Hungarian, Ethiopian, Kenyan, Utican, whatever. We're all on equal playing field in Jesus Christ. And for the Christian, that should carry over from your encounters here in church and carry over into how you deal with people at home, how you deal with people at work, how you deal with people as a family, how you deal with people as an individual, regardless of their color. Amen? Now, I have to also distinguish. That doesn't mean that I have to accept everyone even if they're being criminals or if they're being abusive. All right? Personally, when I look at of all the problems going on today, I really attribute most of it to men, quite honestly. That men, and I said this last week, men have rejected God, and rejecting God, they have rejected the family. And all too often, men will go around, wife to wife and create multiple children. There's no father in the household raising the children with godly morals. You could be a father raising children with ungodly morals, and you're still part of the problem. Every child will rebel against God. How can you say that, Pastor Chris? Every child is born a sinner. No child is born into the family of God. They will inevitably reach some point in their life. For most kids, it's the ages 12 to 17 where they rebel against God and the church and his ways. I don't care what God you're talking about. Moral authority. All right? Now, we happen to believe Christ is the absolute moral authority. So we're talking in a Christian view. But it applies to any world faith. In the Old Testament, slaves were bought and sold and widely abused. In the New Testament, slavery had evolved to the point where slaves could be doctors, slaves could be other skilled workers. All it took is you had a debt. You would go into bondservant. All right? And these people weren't abused. These people were cherished. Now, and don't get me wrong, it's not to say that abuse never happened to any slaves in the New Testament. I'm sure it did. But it was evolving, all right? Slide 3, please. First use of any word meaning servant or slave. Servant, Genesis 9:25. He said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brothers." Now, is that in the positive sense? Absolutely not. It's a curse that this group of people, the Canaanites, would become servants of servants. And it's not deemed as an honor. It's not deemed as something holy. So it's not a Christian sense of the word. It's a sense of a curse. Which tells me, because it's first use of the word, there's a principle in interpreting the Bible called first mention. What that says is that whenever you see a word used for the first time in the Bible, that meaning is what is going to be behind every other use of that word. Regardless of the different meanings it has, at the root of those words will be that meaning. All right? So that means that the word servant, which is truly a slave, the word is actually abed. It says it right there, slave or a servant. And it was spoken by Noah on the ark after his son Ham sinned against him in a very perverted way. Noah got drunk one night, which he probably shouldn't have done, and he laid down in his room and he was naked. And his son Ham came in and thought it was funny and giddy, and there were actual homosexual implications there. And he went out and told his brothers, and they're like, "Did you cover him?" No. No. And they're like, "What?" And they rushed and they grabbed a coat and they covered their father. And because of that, Ham was cursed. And to be a slave of slaves. Okay? It's spoken as a punishment, meaning it would be less desirable, not something we would want. Not spoken of in any higher sense of the word. not in the sense of selflessness, spiritual meaning, voluntary, all Christian connotations of the word slavery, of the word servant. But again, if I'm to be honest, why didn't God simply say from the beginning, thou shalt not have servants? Thou shalt not have slaves. So he doesn't say that, but when I think about why, I have to go all the way to the New Testament to Paul saying, I, Paul, a bondservant of Jesus Christ. And to realize that that is the true connotation and meaning of the word slave in a Christian sense. That we are voluntarily submitting ourselves unto the Lord, and then he looks at his slaves and he goes, no longer do I call you slave, I call you bride. I love you. You're my servant, you're my friend, you're my child, you're my love. And that's what it means to be a doulos of Christ. Amen? So, as I said before, the best I can offer you and why he doesn't do that is progressive revelation, spiritual evolution, if you will. It seems to me that involuntary slavery and servitude was born of and always a part and result of the fall and the curse, involuntary servitude. You should never have to do anything you don't choose to do, right? That includes coming to Christ. That includes submitting yourself to Christ. That includes saying, Lord, your ways are higher than my ways. I will now replace my ways with your ways. It's going to be a process. I'm going to make mistakes, Lord, but that's my life goal. I choose to do that. Christ never arrests anybody in him. We become voluntarily his. Again, this is not explicitly stated in the Bible what I just said is, but involuntary slavery being a result of the fall is not explicitly stated in the Bible. But I'll show you how it's implied by the various verses that we have been given to us in the process of Christ appearing in time and on the earth, and the church being formed. In the Old Testament laws of Leviticus, God gave laws regarding the well-being of slaves, freeing slaves, slaves gaining freedom during the years of Jubilee. That's from Leviticus 25:50. But it's in the New Testament where we see the progression accelerating. In slide 4, please. Bondservants, this is the Apostle Paul talking to the Gentile church in Colossia. It wasn't a Jewish church, a church that had slaves. Well, all of them, all the people had, slavery was an accepted practice in the whole area, Jew or Gentile. Bondservants, obey in everything those who are your earthly masters, not by way of eye service as people pleasers, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. Whatever you do, work heartily, as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Jesus Christ. So, we know that slavery is wrong. The picture we have in our minds of slavery in the United States, slavery throughout history, is wrong. We have risen above that, I hope. So I know that I would never own a slave. I could never treat a person like that. So what would be, and this is how we always apply it when we apply it as preachers to the congregation, what would this apply to? Your job. You're serving somebody for a wage. So you're theirs for the next 8 hours. And I'm talking about in a godly, moral sense. Obviously, you never do anything anybody would want you to do that's not of the Lord. So, in your job to your employer, obey everything of those who are your bosses, not by way of eye service or as people pleasers, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. My operating basis in my jobs, ever since I've been a Christian, was I'm going to do my job not for my boss. I'm going to do my job for my boss. As if that's who I'm doing it for. And because that's who I'm doing it for, I'm not lazy about it. I'm not complacent about it. I don't give 50%. I give 110%, as much as I can to my ability that day. Now, why would Paul write this to a slave that's being abused? He wouldn't. Because by this time, that is not seen as something in a Christian sense that's acceptable. So when you have the KKK here in the United States claiming Christ, don't believe them. They're not claiming Christ. They're claiming the devil. White supremacists claiming the devil. I don't care how many crosses they hold and how many times they say Jesus. All right? That's not Christian. That is Satan trying to pervert what true Christianity is so that people won't become Christians. That's his mission in life. To derail the cross and Christ. What better way to do it than put some white hoods on a bunch of white guys from the South? Right? Slide 5, please. Colossians 4:1, same book, next chapter. Masters, treat your bondservants justly and fairly, knowing that you also have a master in heaven. What does that say? Dude, if you don't treat them good, do you really expect God to treat you good? It's a fear verse. It's saying, fear God in how you deal with people. So, bosses, treat your employees as if unto the Lord. So, anybody who doesn't do that, you know they're not walking in Christ. And that applies to racism today, how the African American community has been treated in the past, or other nationalities within the United States that have been abused in the past. Currently, it's women. Modern-day slavery. Throughout time, humanity went from a place where slavery was employed, a form of which was unkind, not brutal, to a place of brutality where it was not of choice. All right, so we went from a place of brutal slavery, unkind, not of choice, to a place where God dictated they were to be treated with respect, to a place where it became a valid form of getting out of debt, to a place where people who were skilled professionals could be found in such capacity, to a place where God stated there were no more slaves or free men, to a place where the vast majority of the world now sees that involuntary abusive slavery is immoral and unnecessary. So a righteous servitude today, I'm not going to call it slavery because it's not. The most obvious example of that in today's society that would be acceptable is maids, butlers. These are people who are voluntarily, for a wage, working full-time, living in the person's house, and they're serving them. It's not slavery, it's not racist, it's their choice. Is that abused? I'm sure it is. And you hear about it in the news from time to time. This woman will go to the police and say, help, this guy's been keeping me in a room for 6 years. Horrible. But then we still have those in the world, cruel, evil, devilish people who continue to enslave men, women, children, boys, girls of all skin colors for their depraved desires and abusive gratifications. To which I can only respond with God's word on the subject. In slide 6, please. Genesis 3:20. The man called his wife Eve because she was the mother of all living. One man, one woman, one race. I want to talk to you a moment about the Tower of Babel. We are all one race. So the first thing you know that an organization or a group, whether it's political, social, is not walking in a Christian perspective is when they say there are different races. That applies to the Ku Klux Klan. It applies to the Boy Scouts. It applies to Black Lives Matter. We are one race. We all have the same mother, and we all have the same father. We all had the same skin tone. We all have the same shaped eyes. Well, Pastor Chris, if this is true, I want to encourage you, if you ever get the opportunity, to take a ride out to Kentucky to the Creation Museum. And it gives you all the scientific information of how people of dark skin, people of brown skin, people of yellowish skin became such, and how the eye shapes changed and all these things. And it all started at a place called Babel. Anybody know what the sin of Satan was? How he got cast out of heaven? The most famous phrase, I will ascend to the throne of the Most High. And that got him cast out of heaven. God reserves for himself the prerogative to be God, the creator, the absolute moral authority. What I say goes, says God. I don't care what you believe or what you think. When you die, you will face me, and what I say will go. Because it's always been that way. So when Satan said, when Lucifer, that was his angelic name, said, I will ascend to the throne of the Most High, he got kicked out of heaven with a third of the angels. On earth, after Adam and Eve created all these people, they said, you know what? Let's build a tower to God. Not to God, but to get to God. And it was the same thought in the heart, I shall ascend to the throne of the Most High. And God said, you know what, we are going to do something about this. And I don't say we, the angels, and God. I say we, God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Elohim. It's a plural word for God. It's actually the word gods. Said, look what they're trying to do. Let's scatter them. And make it difficult for them to communicate. So they scattered all these people all over the world. So in the African subcontinent, where it's, all tropical, Saharan, desert, the skin color, the melanin, became deeper and darker. In the tropics, where the Spanish people, or in Spain, where the Spanish people originated, that's where all Spanish people originated, was Spain. And then they emigrated to the tropics and South America and what have you. But the level of the climate there, sunlight, summers, winters, developed their skin to be brown. Different shades. I'm not being racist. It's the only way I can talk to you. There are people out there that will see this and will analyze this, go, well, he should have said. It's like, well, sorry, man. I'm just trying to give a sermon here. I'm trying to teach you. Okay? And that is how that all happened. The families that scattered from Babel brought different combinations of genes with them. This is from a woman called Dr. Georgia Prudhomme from the Creation Museum. She wrote an article I took this from, and I actually got to meet the woman when we went out there. Very smart. Christian evolutionist. In other words, she believes in evolution, not in a Darwinian sense. She believes that mankind as a race has evolved. Skin color, eye shape, those are all evolutions. She doesn't believe that a dog became a man. All right? That's the difference. The families that scattered from Babel brought different combinations of genes with them, but their physical differences were trivial. We all have the same basic brown pigment, and we all belong to one race, the human race, descended from Adam and Eve. The term race is often used to classify people based almost solely on physical characteristics. According to evolutionary ideas, these so-called races descended from different ancestors separated by location and time. However, based on biblical history, the term race has to be incorrect because the Bible clearly states we are one race. I've got the same mother and father as you do, as you do, as you do, and as you do. And to believe that's not true is to not believe the Word of God. And to believe that's not true is the basis of all racism and division, whether it's black on white, white on brown, brown on white, white on black. It's all the basis because it makes one person less than or greater than another. You see how Satan started right from the beginning? What we do see in Genesis is a separation of man, of creation by kind, K-I-N-D, kind. Canines are a kind. Birds are a kind. Felines, cats, are a kind. And what do you see then within the kinds? Evolution. On the ark, God didn't bring 2 leopards, 2 lions, 2 tigers, 2 kitty cats. He didn't do that. He brought 2 felines. And then from then till now, felines have evolved into bobcats, tomcats, kitty cats, huh? House cats. I call them kitty cats. Humanity is a kind. No 2 cats ever mated and produced a man, in spite of the fact how people get to look like their pets after a few years. Right? The easiest way to determine a kind is, can they mate? Can they reproduce? And then within the kind of humanity, we have 2 kinds defined in the scriptures, don't we? What are they called? Mankind, womankind. It's a subgroup of humanity. Next slide, please. Slide 7. Acts 17:26-28 tell us this. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries for their dwelling place. And they should seek God, that they should seek God. Here's the root of all your problems, folks. Here's the root of this is why the problems won't be solved by Black Lives Matter or any other social organization. Seek God. If you don't seek God, I'm sorry, racism will just be propagated, whether it's reverse racism, less racism, but still racism. It's always going to be there because that's Satan's tool. And perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us. It's the beauty of God. He's not far. For in him we live and move and have our being. And even as some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring, made from one man, one race, to serve and love one Father, Father God, not many different fathers. There is no God-ordained black race or kind. There is no God-ordained white race or kind. There is no God-ordained yellow race or kind, or brown race or kind. Never once does God separate by skin color or physical attributes. Never. The only time he does is in the subgroup of mankind and womankind. God looks through skin. God sees to the very spirit of a person. Slide 8, please. Galatians 3:28 and 29 tell us this. This is the Apostle Paul speaking to the church in Galatia. There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free. There is no male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And if you are Christ's, then you are Abraham's offspring, heirs according to the promise. Next slide, please. For God shows no partiality. And there you have the Christian perspective. There you have God's view on slavery today. If you have a person you call your slave or your servant, then you probably have a racist thing going on. If you look at somebody and by their skin color alone make the decision, you have a racism problem. I'm talking about 2 people of equal standing, and you decide, bottom line, whether you're being honest with yourself or not, on the color, you have a racism problem. Okay? And I don't care if you're white, brown, black, or yellow. If you do that, you have a racism problem. I believe that as God has told us that he will use all things for the good of those who are called according to his purposes in Romans 8:28, that God can use and has used slavery to show us what it means to be a follower of Christ in both the positive and the negative. in the positive, in the idea that I belong to someone else voluntarily, not to be abused, but to be cared for and to care for the sake of mutual love and the glory of God. And that is the New Testament term, bondservant of Christ, servant of Christ, which is the Greek word for slave, doulos. In the negative sense, by showing us historically what is unacceptable treatment of any people, of any country, and of any origin. To show us how low man can go in his depravity in how they treat their fellow man or woman. So we see the godly sense, but all we have to do is look at history to see how it has become something evil and perverted and disgusting that God never intended. Slide 10, please. James chapter 2, verses 8 and 9. If you really fulfill the royal law according to the Scripture, this is the highest law. You want to talk about commandments as a Christian you're supposed to follow? If you really fulfill the royal law according to the Scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. You are doing well. But if you show partiality, you are committing sin and are convicted by the law as transgressors. And you might as well replace the word partiality, because in the end, that's what racism is. If you are showing racism, which is partiality of any kind, you are committing sin and are convicted by the law as transgressors. So partiality in the sense of racism is again, like I said before, showing a partiality because of a person's skin color or eye shape or a handicap even. Yeah, absolutely. Slide 11, please. One man, one woman, one Father, one Christ for all. 1 Corinthians 15, 45 to 49 tell us. This is the Apostle Paul speaking to a really fleshly church that needed to be rebuked harshly. Thus it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. And this is really the crux of what I think God was doing throughout history in allowing the abuses to go on. You know, it's not that God decided. It's that man decided. Fallen man decided. God has never intervened in your free will, and man chose to oppress people. He still does today, by and large, doesn't he? The first man was from earth. Where am I? Okay. The first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. But it is not the spiritual that is first, but the natural, and then the spiritual. The first man was from earth, a man of dust. The second man is from heaven. Slide 12. As was the man of dust, so also are those who are of the dust. And as is the man of heaven, so also are those who are of heaven. Just as we have borne the image of the man of dust, we shall also bear the image of the man of heaven. So, kind of bringing this back to the beginning, the why. What was God's mechanism of allowing slavery and allowing things to get to where they are today, and speaking about slavery as he does in the Bible? First comes the natural and then the spiritual. In the flesh, slavery is abuse. It is the birth of racism. Seeing anyone as less than, being partial, is the seed of racism. But then comes the spiritual, doesn't it? Christ, who will teach us that we are one, and that we are to live lives of peace and love and respect, regardless of physical appearance, including skin color. It is the spiritual which restores how we live and move and have our being in the natural. It has now been over 8,000 years since the creation of earth. The world has seen the torment and death of so many at the hands of racism, racists, slavery. I, for one, say, we are one, my beloved. In Christ, and Christ, is the only way racism will truly ever be eradicated. The world needs redemption. The world needs Jesus. The world needs the Holy Spirit. And I'm going to end with a scripture. You can put on slide 13. This is from Colossians, again, chapter 3, verses 11 through 17. Here, there is not Greek and Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave, or free. But Christ is all and in all. Put on, then, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, hearts of kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another, and, if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other. As the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. And above all of these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in one body. And be thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God. And whatever you do, in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Amen? I submit to you today, the Christian view is not that slavery should end. The Christian view is not that slavery should end. It is that partiality and racism should end. We have seen how sinful men have perverted God's ways. Slavery of men is a disgusting practice and must not be. But in a biblical sense, in the spiritual sense, to be a bondservant today is to be willingly at the service of another. Isn't that what you're called to in Jesus Christ? Isn't that what agape love calls you and I to do? To put down myself for the sake of others, to live for the benefit of others, to live selflessly and self-sacrificially for the expense of others? That is the Greek word doulos for the Christian. That is the Greek word slave for the Christian. And God says, I will not oppress you. I will not put you in bondage. I will not abuse you. As a matter of fact, I don't want you even calling me that. You are my bride. In Christ, may we all submit to him as his douloses, as his slaves, as his servants, as his bondservants. He, in turn, calls us bride, his love, and he treats us as such. Amen? Amen. Amen. I want to give a quick, just a real quick thing here before I close out in prayer. I want to talk a moment about Black Lives Matter. All right? Black Lives Matter. Amen? Amen? Black Lives Matter. Hallelujah. I can't support the group Black Lives Matter. Well, all lives matter, but I mean, but to say that and to not say there's been an issue in the past, and there is, and we need to deal with any existing racisms. So I think it's okay to put a little focus on Black lives that matter, because they do, But I went to their website, and I wanted to show you what they stand for that I cannot affirm or take part in. And to do this, I have to first define a word from you, because it's the word that is the pivotal word in their statements of what we believe. All I did was type in Black Lives Matter, and I got the national or international site. I got the main. Every chapter has their own website. But this is the main one that they all agree to. The word I have to define for you is the word affirm, or affirming. That means to declare positively, acceptable, to assert to be true, to declare support for and belief in. Okay? So this is from the About page. When you go on the main page, you go to the main menu bar and it says Home, About, Questions. You click on About. We affirm the lives of black, queer, and trans folks, disabled folks, undocumented folks, folks with records, women, and all black lives along the gender spectrum. Our network centers those who have been marginalized within black liberation movements. More on that at the end. All right. I don't affirm black, queer, and trans folks. You see, that's too broad. I affirm their rights to choose their lifestyle. But biblically, I don't affirm their behavior as acceptable or anything I can agree with. Okay? And I do so and I say so in love and not bias. I do so and say so because I want people to go to heaven and not hell. Because God desires that all men would be saved, all right? Now, from the What We Believe page, it says this. We've committed to struggling together and to imagining and creating a world free of anti-blackness, all good, where every black person has the social, economic, and political power to thrive. Now, that sounds okay, right? I don't agree with that. And I'm going to tell you why. No one should have the power to inherently thrive in any area. People have rights to the ability and to the opportunity to thrive in any area. But to just say, here's the power to do so, to someone who has not worked for it, earned it, the best way to get a people to not appreciate what they have is to give them what they have for nothing. Because they have nothing invested in it. No one should have the power to inherently thrive in any area. Everyone should have equal opportunity to do so. Equal. Impartially equal. What does that mean? That if you want to succeed, if you want to, get a job that makes a lot of money and doesn't have you working 90 hours a week, you're going to have to go to school to do that. And so, whether you're white, brown, black, yellow, whatever, you're going to need to set a goal to do that. The problem is that for certain ethnic groups, to get to that place is a more difficult walk. So we as a society has to try to level that playing field. And it won't happen. You know why? It's not a Christian society, folks. It's not. So what it'll inherently do is pervert it, and it'll go all the way to one side at the expense of the other side. And then it creates what's called reverse racism. All right? Biblical Christianity acknowledges every person's right to believe what they choose and to believe and live lifestyles howsoever they choose. It also believes homosexuality in all its forms to be sin and rebellion towards God. The organization, in all its forms, I should also include, child's, what's it called, when men love babies and just all kind, transgender, all that stuff, that's sin in God's eyes, all right? The organization Black Lives Matter, therefore, is anti-Christian, and while we can and all believe that Black Lives Matter, I haven't even touched on abortion and their acceptance of abortion, all right? And stand for all people to be treated equally and without racism, the organization itself must be rejected. So I hope that's taken in the heart that I'm giving it in. I was invited to do a prayer march with a peace march with somebody who was I don't know if they're actually a pastor here in Utica, and they were organizing it on Facebook, and they sent me a message. And, I don't just blindly follow people anymore, I don't care what you call yourself to be, Christian, pastor, whatever. I check you out. And I went on, I saw all the Black Lives Matter stuff. And so I wrote him back, and I said, dude, I just have to ask you, is this associated with that organization? I'll do a peace march, but not if it's under the banner of BLM. And here's why. And he got mad at me, he yelled at me, and then he disinvited me. Because you know why? I'm a racist. I'm simply taking a Christian worldview. Amen? So look, I hope that this message spoke to you guys. I hope that it gave you an objective viewpoint of what God calls you to as far as racism is concerned within our faith in the world. Amen? And that we would live lives seeking to bring unity to this United States of America in Utica and not division. Amen? Amen. Worship team, come on up. you.